What was it like to sleep in the time of Jesus more than 2,000 years ago? For centuries, we have imagined ancient rest as a simpler version of our own experience. Perhaps a wooden bed frame, a straw mattress, a modest room with a door. But what if that entire image is wrong? What if the bed wasn't furniture at all, but something you unrolled from the wall each night and put away each morning? What if privacy didn't exist because staying warm required sleeping arm's length from your entire family? When you truly step inside the sleeping arrangements of the first-century home, you discover that rest was not a passive retreat, but an actively engineered process. Every element, from the thickness of the stone walls to the animals breathing on the floor below, was part of a calculated system designed to answer one question. How do you survive the night when you have almost nothing? Stay until the end, because what you're about to discover reveals not just how people slept, but how they survived within constraints so severe that a single material failure could mean the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. The first thing to understand about sleep in the time of Jesus is that there were no bedrooms, no separate spaces. The first-century home was a single room where everything happened in the same confined stone space. During the day, this room was a workshop. At midday, it became a dining area. And when the sun dropped below the horizon, that same floor transformed into the sleeping quarters for an entire family. This was not a large space. Archaeological excavations at Capernaum reveal that a typical room measured approximately 7.5 meters on each side. Imagine a modern bedroom, then double it, and now place an entire extended family inside. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, all sharing the same area. But the floor was not level. Right inside the doorway, the ground dropped. This lower section was reserved for the family's most valuable assets, their animals. A goat, perhaps a cow, maybe a few sheep. These creatures lived inside, in the same room, separated from the family not by walls, but by a change in elevation. At night, their presence filled the space with low sounds. The rhythm of chewing, the soft huffing of breath. Above this animal zone, the floor rose. This elevated platform, called the mastaba, was the family's domain. The same surface that held the grinding stone in the morning became the sleeping area after dark. Nothing was fixed. Mats had to be unrolled. Objects had to be moved. The space had to be actively reconfigured because the room itself never stopped working. This was the reality of domestic life in the first century. No retreat into private quarters, just a single stone platform that the entire family shared. And to understand why families lived this way, you have to ask, how did anyone stay warm enough to survive the night? In the cold nights of the Galilean hill country, staying warm was not a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. And the first-century home was a machine designed to capture, store, and release heat with nothing more than stone, animals, and time. The walls were the first part of this system, thick, solid, built from black basalt in the Galilee or pale limestone in Judea. These walls measured 0.5 meter thick or more. Stone possesses thermal mass, the ability to absorb heat slowly during the day and release it gradually through the night. When the afternoon sun beat down on the exterior, the dense rock absorbed that energy. But the heat didn't immediately penetrate to the interior. Instead, it moved through the stone slowly, taking 8 to 12 hours to complete the journey. This meant that the peak heat of the afternoon didn't arrive inside the home until late evening, precisely when the outside air was cooling. The walls captured the sun and delayed its warmth until it was most needed. During the summer, this same principle worked in reverse. The thick stone kept the brutal midday heat outside, but thermal mass alone was not enough. The second part of the heating system was biological. The animals kept on the lower level were not just livestock, they were living radiators. A single cow generates substantial heat through its metabolic processes. The heat rose naturally from the animal area, warming the elevated platform where the family slept. The family positioned themselves above the source of warmth, using the animals' bodies as a rudimentary underfloor heating system that required no fuel and no fire. The elevated platform was the third component. By raising the sleeping area above the animal stalls, the family separated themselves from the waste, while simultaneously positioning themselves in the warmest part of the room. Heat rises, always, and in the confined space of a first-century home, with thick stone walls trapping that warmth and animals generating constant thermal energy, the platform became a zone where the temperature remained several degrees above the outside air, even on the coldest nights. This system worked because all three elements functioned together. The walls stored heat, the animals generated heat, the platform captured heat. Remove any one component, and the entire strategy collapsed. When we think of a bed, we think of an object, a frame, a mattress, something permanent. But in the time of Jesus, the bed was not furniture. It was a system of textiles and reeds that appeared each night and disappeared each morning. The primary sleeping surface was a woven mat, not thick, not soft, just a tightly constructed layer of plant fibers, usually sea rush that grew in the marshes. These reeds were harvested by men, then processed by women and children who split the stalks, removing the spongy interior and leaving behind tough, flexible strips. These strips were then woven into mats. The process required knowledge passed down through generations. Which reeds to choose, when to harvest them, how to prepare the fibers so they wouldn't rot or attract insects. The finished mat was thin, durable, and completely portable. During the day, it was rolled up and stored in a niche carved into the stone wall. This wasn't just tidiness, it was necessity. A mat left on the floor would be trampled, soiled, and infested. At night, the mat was unrolled onto the raised platform, but it was never placed directly on the cold stone. First, a layer of loose straw, wheat or barley stalks, was spread across the sleeping area. This straw provided cushioning, but more importantly, insulation. Straw traps air in the spaces between the stalks, and air is a poor conductor of heat. The straw layer prevented the cold stone from drawing warmth away from the body. The reed mat then went on top. But the mat was only the foundation. The real insulation came from the wool cloak, the himation. For the average peasant, this garment was the single most valuable item they owned. Heavy, undyed. During the day, it was worn as a coat. At night, it became a blanket. Wool is an extraordinary material. Each fiber has a natural crimp that creates millions of tiny air pockets throughout the fabric. These pockets trap body heat and prevent it from escaping. But wool has one critical vulnerability. If it gets wet, those air pockets fill with water, and water conducts heat efficiently. A wet wool cloak doesn't just stop insulating. It actively draws heat away from the body, accelerating hypothermia. This is why the roof mattered so much. A leaking roof didn't just ruin stored grain. It soaked the family's bedding, rendering their primary source of nighttime insulation useless or even dangerous. Maintaining the roof, rolling it with a stone cylinder after every rain to seal the cracks, was not optional. It was survival maintenance. So the bed was actually 4 layers: loose straw, a woven reed mat, the human body, and a heavy wool cloak. Simple, portable, effective, but only if every component remained dry and intact. We live in a world where darkness is optional. But in the first century home, when the sun set, profound darkness arrived. The only source of light was the oil lamp, small, ceramic. These lamps were filled with olive oil and fitted with a linen wick. When lit, they produced a flickering flame. The light output was extraordinarily weak. A modern office is lit to around 500 lux. The average illumination in a first-century home at night was less than 1 lux, more than 1,000 times dimmer. In this environment, the effective radius of activity was no more than a few meters. Beyond that, the darkness was complete. You couldn't read, you couldn't see faces clearly, you couldn't navigate safely without knowing the exact position of every object. This is why the lamp was kept burning through the night, not for visibility, but for basic safety. A person getting up needed at least enough light to avoid tripping, but this profound darkness did something to the human body that we've lost. It triggered the release of melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep, much earlier in the evening than occurs under electric lighting. The circadian rhythm was tightly synchronized with the solar cycle. When the sun disappeared, the body prepared for rest, and this rest followed a pattern that has largely disappeared: biphasic sleep. The night was not one continuous block of unconsciousness. Instead, it was divided into 2 phases. The first sleep began shortly after sunset and lasted approximately 4 hours. Then came a period of wakefulness, sometimes called the watch, that lasted 1 to 2 hours. During this time, family members might talk quietly, check on the animals, or simply lie awake. This was not insomnia. It was the natural rhythm of the night. After the watch, the second sleep began and continued until dawn. This pattern was driven by the physics of the stone house. As the night progressed, the interior temperature gradually dropped. The thermal mass of the walls released its stored heat, but eventually reached equilibrium with the outside air. This cooling often coincided with the period between the 2 sleeps. In the profound darkness, sleep was not the solitary, continuous experience we know today. It was segmented, communal, and deeply tied to the thermal environment of the home. In a first-century home, an entire extended family slept on the same raised platform: parents, children, sometimes grandparents or unmarried siblings, all lying within arm's reach of one another. There were no interior walls, no doors to close, just a single stone surface covered with reed mats and shared by every member of the household. This was not a cultural choice, it was a thermal necessity. On cold nights, individual sleeping arrangements were simply not viable. A person sleeping alone would lose body heat rapidly. But a group sleeping close together, combined with the rising heat from the animals below, created warmth enough to sustain life through the night. Privacy, as we understand it, simply did not exist as a concept. There was no expectation of solitude. From birth to death, an individual lived their entire life within earshot and arm's reach of their family. At night, this proximity was total. The sounds of breathing, the movement of bodies, the occasional cry of a child, the low murmur of animals below. All of this was the texture of the night, and yet the family functioned. Social order was maintained not through physical barriers, but through respect, routine, and an unspoken understanding of boundaries. Children learned early where they could move, when they should remain quiet. The night imposed discipline. In the darkness, with limited light and limited space, every action had consequences for the entire group. This communal sleeping arrangement also served security. In a world without locks, the presence of multiple adults in the same room provided protection. A thief attempting to enter would immediately wake the household. The collective sleeping space was not just about warmth, it was about survival in every sense. The transition to sleep began with water, specifically with the washing of feet. In the 1st century, people wore open sandals that left the feet exposed to the dirt and filth of the roads. And these roads were packed earth, trampled by livestock. By the end of the day, the feet were covered in dust and animal waste. Bringing that filth into the sleeping area was a hygiene risk, so the washing of feet was mandatory. Stone vessels were used for this purpose. Stone was preferred because, under Jewish purity laws, it was considered immune to ritual impurity. Water came from the household cistern. Every 1st century home was a rainwater collection system. The flat roof funneled water through clay pipes into an underground cistern carved into the bedrock. These cisterns could hold enough water to sustain a family through the dry summer months. The water was precious, but foot washing was not optional. After the feet were washed, the evening meal was consumed. The meal was simple. Barley bread formed the bulk of it, coarse, dense, high in fiber. The bread was often accompanied by a stew of lentils or chickpeas, sometimes thickened with onions, garlic, and olive oil. The biological logic was sound. The high fiber content ensured a slow release of glucose, providing steady energy through the night. The legumes added protein. The garlic and herbs had antimicrobial properties. This was not gourmet food. It was fuel. With feet clean and stomachs full, the family moved to the final stage, the unrolling of the mats. The mats had to be retrieved. The straw had to be spread evenly. The mats had to be positioned. The wool cloaks had to be within reach, and the oil lamp had to be checked, wick trimmed, oil replenished. All of this took time, energy, attention. The transition to sleep was not passive, it was work. The sleeping system was efficient, but it had no margin for error. When something failed, the consequences cascaded. Consider the roof. It was constructed from wooden beams supporting a lattice of branches covered with layers of reeds, straw, and mud plaster. This surface had to be waterproof, but it was organic. It dried, it cracked. And when the winter rains arrived, water seeped through. A leaking roof soaked the stored grain, ruined the textiles, and saturated the wool cloaks that the family depended on for insulation. Wet wool is worse than no insulation at all. When the air pockets fill with water, the fabric stops trapping heat and starts conducting it away. A person sleeping under a wet wool cloak would lose body heat rapidly. Hypothermia would become a real risk. This is why roof maintenance was not deferred work. After every rain, the roof had to be rolled with a stone cylinder to seal the cracks. Neglect this, and the entire thermal system collapsed. The cistern was another point of failure. If the plaster lining developed cracks, water would seep away. A family with a failing cistern faced a slow crisis. The stored water would drop, rationing would begin. Even the food supply was fragile. Most families stored grain in large ceramic jars. A poor harvest, a Roman tax collector demanding his share, or an unexpected expense could deplete those reserves quickly. And without adequate calories, the body's ability to generate heat during sleep dropped. This fragility was compounded by Roman taxation. Taxes could consume 30 to 50% of a family's total production. This extraction meant that families had no surplus, no savings, no buffer. They lived on the edge. The first-century sleeping system worked, but only because families maintained it with constant vigilance. A dry roof, a full cistern, adequate grain stores, clean feet, rolled mats, trimmed lamp wicks. Each task was small, but together they formed the infrastructure of survival. When you step back and look at the complete picture of sleep in the time of Jesus, what becomes clear is that rest was not a retreat from the world, but an extension of the daily struggle to survive within severe constraints. The single room, the shared platform, the woven mat, the wool cloak, the animal heat, the stone walls, all of it was part of a system refined over centuries to answer one question: how do you sustain life with almost nothing? The answer was adaptation. Families learned to use the thermal properties of stone to capture the sun's energy and delay its release until nightfall. They learned that animals were biological heaters. They learned to harvest reeds and weave them into portable sleeping surfaces. They learned that wool, when kept dry, could trap enough body heat to prevent hypothermia. This knowledge was not written down. It was passed from generation to generation through observation. A child learned by watching their parents unroll the mats, spread the straw, wash the feet, tend the lamp. They learned where to sleep to capture the rising warmth. They learned to recognize the signs of a failing roof. They learned that survival depended not on wealth or technology, but on attention to small details. And yet, for all this ingenuity, the system was not a choice. It was a necessity imposed by economic and environmental conditions. Roman taxation prevented the accumulation of wealth. The deforested hills meant that wood was scarce. The semi-arid climate meant that water had to be collected and stored with care. The cold nights meant that collective warmth was essential. So when we look at the simple reed mat, unrolled each night on a stone platform, we are not looking at a quaint relic. We are looking at material evidence of a population living under crushing economic pressure, adapting to environmental constraints, and surviving through technical knowledge and social cooperation that modern people would struggle to replicate. The first-century night was dark, cold, communal, and fragile. It required work to prepare for, vigilance to maintain, and resilience to endure. But it was also remarkably efficient. The systems that sustained sleep, thermal mass, biological heating, portable bedding, were renewable, durable, and perfectly adapted to the landscape. They lasted for centuries without significant change, not because people were too ignorant to innovate, but because the solutions they had developed were already optimal for the conditions they faced. Understanding how people slept in the time of Jesus reveals something fundamental about the ancient world. It was not a world of comfort, but it was a world where ordinary families, using nothing more than stone, reeds, wool, and the warmth of their own bodies, engineered a way to survive the night. And in that survival, night after night, generation after generation, there is something worth recognizing, not the romance of simplicity, but the resilience of human ingenuity when confronted with constraints that leave no room for error. If this investigation strengthened your understanding of daily life in the time of Jesus, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Until the next video.